You are about to play a game. It might hurt. It might kill you. And in one ancient civilization, if you lost, a priest would cut off your head on the court while thousands of spectators cheered. Thousands of years ago, your ancestors stepped forward anyway. Not because they were reckless, not because they didn't understand danger, but because the game meant something. Something so powerful that the risk of death was simply part of the point. The dangerous games ancient humans played were not accidents. They were rituals. They were training. They were religion, politics, and survival, compressed into a single terrifying moment. And the strangest part? You still carry the instincts those games were designed to test. Start with what you think you know about ancient play. You probably picture children throwing sticks, maybe some harmless wrestling in the dirt. But the archaeological record tells a very different story. A story soaked in blood, engineered danger, and deliberate risk. Look at Mesoamerica. Somewhere between 1400 BCE and the height of the Aztec Empire, millions of people played a game called ulamilistli. You might know it as the Mesoamerican ballgame. It was played in enormous stone courts, some of them stretching over 60 meters long. A solid rubber ball, weighing as much as 4 kilograms, had to be kept in motion using only the hips, thighs, and elbows. No hands, no feet. The stone rings on the walls were not just targets. They were thresholds. Getting the ball through one was so rare that it reportedly ended the game instantly. Now here is what the tour guides sometimes leave out. Anthropologist Carl Taub and his colleagues, studying iconography across dozens of Mesoamerican sites, found consistent evidence that the ball game was tied directly to sacrifice. The exact interpretation is still debated. Whether it was the losing captain, the winning captain, or specific players selected for ritual death, the archaeological evidence at sites like Chichen Itza and Monte Alban makes one thing clear. The court was not just a playing field. It was a stage where the boundary between life and death was deliberately made thin. And yet people lined the walls to watch, thousands of them, because the game was not entertainment in the way you think of entertainment. It was cosmology made physical. The ball represented the sun. The court represented the sky. The players were enacting the movement of celestial bodies. To play was to hold the universe in your hips for a moment. To lose was not simply failure. It was to become part of the story. Your brain does something interesting when you watch a high-stakes contest. Psychologist Dolph Zillman, whose research on sports spectatorship shaped the field of media psychology, found that the emotional intensity of a game is amplified by the perceived stakes of the outcome. In other words, the higher the cost of losing, the more your nervous system becomes invested in the result. Ancient spectators were not primitive thrill seekers. They were experiencing something neurologically specific. Witnessing a game where a man's life was on the line did not just excite them, it bonded them to each other. It synchronized their heartbeats. It made them feel part of something larger than themselves. That social bonding function is crucial. Because dangerous games were not unique to Mesoamerica. They appeared on every inhabited continent, and they all shared the same hidden architecture. But hold that thought, because what happened next in ancient Greece makes the Mesoamerican ballgame look almost tame. Move to ancient Greece. The original Olympic Games, founded traditionally in 776 BCE, included events you would recognize: running, jumping, throwing. But also events that would clear most modern sports committees in about 30 seconds. The pankration was one of them. Ancient historian Philostratus described it as a combination of wrestling and boxing with almost no rules. Competitors could break fingers, choke opponents unconscious, and attack joints. The only things prohibited were biting and eye gouging. And deaths did occur. Here is one that history actually recorded by name. His name was Arrhichion. It was 564 BCE, the Olympic Games. He was competing in the pankration final. His opponent had locked a chokehold around his neck. By any rational measure, Arrhichion was already dying. His vision was narrowing, his body was failing. And in what may be the most extraordinary act in the history of sport, in his final conscious moment, he twisted his body and dislocated his opponent's ankle with enough force that the man screamed and tapped out of the match. Arrhichion was already dead when the submission was registered. The judges awarded him the crown posthumously. His corpse was crowned the Olympic champion. Men trained for years for this. Their families celebrated their victories with the same reverence reserved for military heroes. And that connection was not accidental. The Greek city-states used athletic competition explicitly as military preparation and political display. When you watched a man survive the pankration, you were watching your city's strength made visible. But go back further, much further. Anthropologist Johann Huizinga, in his landmark 1938 work Homo Ludens, argued that play is not something humans do in addition to serious life. He argued that play is constitutive of culture itself. That ritual, law, war, art, and even philosophy all emerge from the structure of play. And when you look at the evidence from pre-agricultural societies, his thesis becomes difficult to argue with. Hunter-gatherer groups across multiple continents engaged in what researchers have termed competitive ordeal games. These were physical trials designed to push participants to and sometimes past their physical limits. Among groups studied in the Amazon basin, ethnographer Napoleon Chagnon documented the Yanomami practice of chest-pounding duels. Two men would take turns striking each other with full-force blows to the chest, no blocking, until one conceded. The purpose was not dominance for its own sake. It was a calibrated system for resolving conflict without triggering all-out warfare. The danger was real, the stakes were real, and the damage was carefully contained within a structure that everyone agreed to. That structure is the key, because dangerous games were never pure chaos. They were controlled chaos, and the control was everything. Your brain has a system specifically dedicated to calculating risk and reward. The prefrontal cortex runs constant cost-benefit analyses. When you perceive a situation as having clear rules, clear roles, and a defined endpoint, your threat response system modulates. You can experience fear without being overwhelmed by it. You can perform under pressure precisely because the danger is framed. Ancient humans were not less aware of this than you are. They were, in many ways, more deliberate about engineering it. The Norse had a tradition of holmgang, a formalized duel fought on a small marked island or cloth boundary with strict rules about weapon choice, shield replacement, and number of strikes. Breaking the rules was not just cheating, it was social death. The holmgang was used to settle legal disputes, defend honor, and resolve conflicts that the Thing, the Norse legal assembly, could not adjudicate. It was dangerous. It was sometimes fatal. And it was governed by a level of procedural detail that would impress a modern arbitration lawyer. What strikes researchers studying these traditions is the consistency of the psychological mechanism underneath them. Historian Alan Gutman, in his comparative study of sports across cultures, identified what he called the controlled transgression of normal social limits as a defining feature of formalized, dangerous play. These games created a temporary world where the usual rules about violence were suspended and replaced with a different set of rules. You were allowed to hurt someone. You were required to accept being hurt. And at the end, you shook hands, or bowed, or performed whatever closing ritual the culture demanded, and walked back into ordinary life transformed. That transformation mattered, because the game was always also an initiation. In cultures from ancient Sparta to the tribes of Papua New Guinea, documented by anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski, dangerous physical trials marked the passage from one social identity to another. A boy who survived the ordeal became a man. A man who won the contest became a warrior or a leader. The danger was not incidental to that transformation. It was the mechanism. Because enduring real physical risk and continuing to function produces a specific kind of self-knowledge that cannot be generated any other way. Neuroscientist Martin Paulus has studied what happens to the human brain during high-stress physical challenges. The experience of pushing through genuine fear and physical pain and surviving physically rewires threat response circuitry in the prefrontal cortex. It does not just build confidence. It changes the threshold at which the fear system triggers. Ancient societies did not have neuroscience, but they had thousands of years of observation. They knew that people who had been through the game were different afterward, and so they built the game into their culture's skeleton. Even the games that look purely physical were never purely physical. The Roman gladiatorial contests, studied extensively by historian Garrett Fagan, were embedded in a complex system of social meaning that bore almost no resemblance to the modern image of mindless blood sport. Gladiators had professional identities, they had fan followings, they had training schools and legal standings and retirement possibilities. Many survived long careers. The arena was, among other things, a theatre for demonstrating Roman values about courage, discipline, and the relationship between a man and his fate. When a gladiator fell and awaited the crowd's verdict, the moment compressed everything Rome believed about itself into a single held breath. Here is a question worth sitting with. Some historians argue that modern sports, by removing real risk from competition, have made us not just safer, but fundamentally different. That something our ancestors understood instinctively about what games were for has quietly disappeared. Maybe they are right. Maybe they are wrong. But the fact that we keep inventing extreme sports, combat sports, and high-stakes competitions suggests that something in us is still looking for what Arrhichion found on that Olympic sand in 564 BCE. And you have felt it. Maybe at a championship game, maybe at a boxing match, maybe watching a competition where you did not know the outcome and everything seemed to narrow down to a single instant. That narrowing is ancient. The capacity for it is built into you. Tonight, when you watch a game, any game, and you feel your pulse rise as the moment approaches, something very old in your nervous system is waking up. It recognizes the structure, the clear rules, the defined roles, the elevated stakes. It knows this feeling. It has known it for thousands of years. The arena changes. The game changes. But the part of you that leans forward and holds your breath has been doing this since before civilization had a word for itself. You are still playing the game. You always have been. If something in this video made your pulse actually rise, that reaction is exactly what this video was about. That is the mechanism working. Hit like if you felt it. And if you want to go deeper into the psychology of why humans seek high-stakes experiences, that video is right here. I will see you there.